So when we practice, we need to reflect on these factors of Nibbana, and we need to behave towards our lives in a way that is not dangerous, where we take care and are aware of the dangers. Because the desires that drive our life and that are in our life, they are actually a very strong energy, and if we don't handle it correctly, they can become dangerous. And it's like dealing with fire that is hot, so we have to know how to deal with it. And we can take the example of the Buddha. He had attained Nibbana in his lifetime already, but he was able to handle the five khandhas, his life as a human being, continually onwards with care and circumspection. He knew about the dangers of tanha and of craving and all these things. He had understood these, and he related to them wisely and skillfully. He knew about life, and so he could relate to life correctly. And the kilesas, the defilements of the mind and the cravings of tanha, they're not something that we should be averse to or that are ugly in itself. It is something that it is part of nature that we have to know how to deal with and how to handle. And this is the teaching of the Buddha, to how to deal with tanha and kilesas in a skillful, correct way. When in our lives we will necessarily always meet obstacles and hindrances. Just think about the weather, for example, the cold and the heat, the rain, the snow and the wind. All these things, they're not things that we desire, that we wish to, but we have to adapt to them all the time. But to adapt to these phenomena of nature is not something negative. It is something that makes us skillful in finding answers and to how to survive and how to get over these obstacles. It is something like the problems of life. They are meant to give rise to wisdom in us. So the Buddha didn't deny all these troubles. He first saw like dukkha in life as a noble truth, and saw that life is always full of troubles and hardships. And he wasn't denying them or saying one should run away or get irritated by them or expect too much of life. But he said, look at the changes of life and reflect on the discomfort that the life brings, especially the discomfort of the body, for example, getting old, which is something we don't desire, and health, getting weak, we don't desire. But it gives rise for skillful means, and it is an opportunity to develop panya. Panya means wisdom. And in order not to get irritated or even depressed by these processes of life, so the Buddha said one needs to put things down, be able to put things down, lay things down, let things be, and abandon things. Just like when we come here to give dana, to give offerings, we actually practice on a level that is tangible, very, very easy to understand, how to give away things and let things be and just sacrifice. And so to summarize, like wherever there's dukkha, there's the opportunity for wisdom to arise. The Buddha spoke about refuge, to have a refuge, sarana. We sometimes see that the body or the external world is a kind of refuge, but these are dependencies where we rely on in our lives. The external world, for example, the houses we live in, the body that we have, these are paccaya. These are the four requisites that are necessary for a living. And these are things we need to rely on, and that help to alleviate dukkha that arises from having sankharas, having a conditioned body that we have to use in our lives. Things become more and more complicated if the circumstances grow. For example, Ajahn Kalyano, he started with almost nothing in this monastery, like just simply living in a hut, and there were not many guests, but now people and numbers are increasing, so there has to be more infrastructure. There has to be more that Ajahn Kalyana has to worry about, arrange, and build in order to provide comfort for those who come to visit and those who live here. So he has to endeavor and strive to build a hall, build toilets, and make sure the place is comfortable for the people that come. So responsibility increases. And this is about what is called sasana vatu, the objects of the sasana, the material objects of the Buddhist religion, the temple buildings that you can see. And we need to remind ourselves that these things, if they are a refuge to us, they are only as far as providing convenience for our physical comfort, nothing else. And we have to keep this, the purpose of these buildings and these material objects in mind. What is more important is the internal refuge, the refuge that one takes in oneself. And this needs to be nourished, this needs to be maintained and built up. Just like when we nourish the body, we need to give the body eat. We carefully consider that we eat in order to strengthen the body, to make it healthy, to build up a good immune system, and to make it strong. And for mental health, we should have the same considerations. Even though he just said, Luang Por just mentioned that dukkha and suffering is necessary and it is a chance for understanding, we need some phases in our lives where we have peace and where we find quietness, tranquility. And so we need to practice to develop mental peace. And the most important factor in this is making one's views correct. This is called dituju kamma, making one's views straight. That means one has to reflect on one's actions, one has to have mindfulness, wisdom, and one needs to check what one is doing, and then one can plan correctly. One needs to correct one's views, whether they are leading to desires or whether they are leading to cessation of desires. So when one develops correct view, this brings about peace of mind, and it brings a good mental state, good moods, and it brings about wakefulness and awareness and heedfulness. So in all activities and all postures, like, we need to relate to the world, and with our activities, it is like we see them like guests that are coming. They're coming to our house and visiting us. They're just passing by, whether we're sitting, walking, standing or lying down. These are just temporary activities. And we need to check whether the guests that come to visit our house, whether they are people that we know, that we are maybe relatives that we can trust, and whether they are good friends or whether they are strangers that we need to be careful with and carefully observe them. And we've got the duty to not be careless when we guard our house and when we guard our receive people and people coming in. So if we are negligent, then this might become dangerous. And similar, it is true for our mental health, that we need to look after it and be careful about not giving way to irritations or bad mind states, or depressions, angriness, and keeping in mind that if we have wrong view about ourselves, if we are immersed into wrong view, this is dukkha.
The boss says he thinks he's spoken enough. Does anybody have any questions?
I've got one question. It's easy to forgive someone, but how do we cultivate respect for that person again. Say someone done to you wrong, and then you forgive it. But how do then one can cultivate respect for that person again?
Paul recommends to see the other person in the light of nature, that the other person is also subject to the nature that has to permanently change and is liable to degeneration, doesn't last, is not enduring, has a body that has to deteriorate, and just the same as we are, reflect on the nature of the physical person, and then we can see the other person as a relative, because we're of the same kind. We're of the same kind that we have to age and we have to degenerate. And then maybe we can relieve our enmity or our feelings of disrespect, because we see the commonness in us as human beings. And then we can even greet her, and when we ask her, how are you? And the other person says, well, fine or not fine, we can immediately understand that, because we are of the same nature, like the physical components of our life. This is like relating to each other like this is just like the Sangha in the times of the Buddha, when they asked each other, how are you? They wouldn't answer good or bad. They would just say, it's enough to bear with. It's good enough to bear with. And that tells that they understand about the physical nature of themselves. So if we are getting carried away by pleasures and fun and desires, then we'd answer, if somebody asks us, how are you feeling, we'd say, oh, I'm feeling fine. But that's not the way of the Buddha. It's simply an expression of one getting deluded with fun and pleasure. So Luang Por says, with Luang Por Cha, there was one layperson that asked him, Sabaidi, are you feeling well? And usually if you answer, I'm feeling well, Luang Por Cha would answer, it's not good to be well. It's a play of word in Thai. So you can compare it to a wax figure in the sun, and which is gradually melting away, and you ask, is this part good or that? You can't say, because it's all dissolving anyway.
Any more questions?
Teacher play an important part in our practice. So Luang Por shared with us his experience with Ajahn Chah, that now that he finds very memorable for his training or during the time he stayed with him.
So of the qualities of Luang Por Cha, Luang Por would like to mention that Luang Por had a heart that sacrifices, and he was very bright in spirits, and he possessed what is called patisampita. That means the wisdom and the intelligence, and on many levels, like it is defined in the scriptures. For example, teaching the Dhamma, understanding the conventions, the language, and knowing how to teach which person, giving similes, and the 4 factors I can't really fully remember.
Luang Por, could Luang Por explain to me, what the Buddha means by when you cross the shore, the other shore, you put down your raft. What is that raft that the Buddha referring to?
The raft means the rupa khandas, the bodily khandas that are part of the samsaric round of existence, and that we can't carry over, but that we need to leave behind.
So the raft is not is it also refer to the teaching, the practice?
I just compare the teachings to one of those Chinese boats, like the Chinese junk. One takes one across the ocean, but when one reaches the other side, one doesn't take the ship up onto the land with one leaves it behind.
I still cannot understand what when Buddha says the raft, what does it mean there? Because sometimes you hear people say, all are equal, all religions are the same, so you don't particularly attach to Buddhism or anything. So I don't really understand what Buddha means by the raft and the art.
On one level, general level, all religions are the same, teaching people to be good, fulfill their potential as human beings and to reach goodness. But the raft is the teachings or the method by which one does that. And in Buddhism that method is literally learning to let go or abandon attachment.
All attachment, including the Buddha's teaching?
Attachment to these 5 khandhas. That's the attachment one should abandon.
So I'll try to summarize the question first. It was the fact that Buddhism, talking about the fact that Buddhism is a means to purify the heart and make the stains of the heart, the defilements, the poisons of the heart gradually disappear. And it's just, according to the person that asked, it's the supreme method for this. And but there's people that are in states where they are not maybe accessible to these teachings, like drug addicts and people that are prone to drugs. And so the question was, could Luang Por help how to give some advice on making this supreme teaching a bit more clear in this light of drug addicts, as we are all Buddhists. So Luang Por answered saying, like, to be a Buddhist relies on many factors. Many factors come together to make one a Buddhist, and mainly it is to know one's desires and to be able to refrain from one's desires. And he said, like, those people that are addicted to drugs, they are in a stage where they are desiring things, and they're carried away by pleasures. That's one thing. And the second thing, they may not be able to give that up at that moment because they are addicted. So drugs, Luang Por said, are not necessarily always bad. For example, morphine can be used for as a narcotic, or like to relieve pain as a painkiller. So it depends on how these things are used, and people need to know the right measure in whatever they consume and whatever they do in their actions and in their livelihood. Even with food, like certain foods, if consumed too much, can be unhealthy. So it is all about, like, living one's life in the Buddhist way means to live in the right measure, to know what is right, the right amount. And these days people get out of balance very easily just because this sense for the right measure is not present anymore. And so the advice that the Buddha gives to find the right balance is to practice restraint and to refrain from doing these unwholesome things and getting into these processes that are unwholesome. And Luang Por said, like, he himself, like, when he ordained, he didn't actually want to ordain. He did it out of the tradition, and he found, like, that it is a way of restraint, and that is beautiful and leads to peace. And so this opened up the path for him to live his mind wholesomely and develop peace of mind. And it is a path of renunciation. And so if one is a drug addict or addicted to drug, one actually needs to correct one's behavior, find ways to correct them and improve the cause and that one is on. Otherwise one won't be able to come out. And in fact, everybody is using drugs or has used drugs sometimes. It is only to a different level. Even Luang Por himself, when he was a young man, he drank alcohol, not to the extent that he got drunk, or not very heavily, or he didn't get addicted. But he has experiences of how people can get carried away by drugs and things that gratify their desires. So. This is the way to reflect as a Buddhist is to find means and ways to correct one's behavior and try to get out of the addiction of these things and the residue effect that drugs still have on the body may be there. So it's quite difficult. Like the people that are addicted, the physical shape they are in demands a certain amount, but it is possible to get out of the cycle.
Maybe that's enough for today, and Luang Por is still with us for another couple of weeks, so there'll be an opportunity on following days at this time or some of the evenings tonight. Monday night we have Dhamma talks. For the moment, we'll leave it there.
Possible to explain vinyana?
Vinyana, just in general what it means?
Yeah.
Or? Literally vinyan or vinyana. Vinyana means awareness or knowing, that which knows. Usually it's associated with that which we know through the senses, what we call the six sense doors. So there's the eyes, the consciousness or awareness that arises with the eyes. There needs to be a healthy eye, and then light, and then a form that is seen, and then you'll get chaksu vinyana will arise, or eye consciousness, or eye knowing. And that can happen at the ears, tongue, nose, touch with the body, and then the mind itself is also one door, so you'll get what we call mano vinyana, which is like mind consciousness or mind awareness, the knowing with the mind, the knowing of objects, different mental objects with the mind.
The other day you were explaining that the raft referring to the five khandhas. Yes, I was asking the question about putting down the raft across the shore. Could it happen momentarily? Like, you still not yet attain the fully enlightenment, that you can happen that momentarily and then you go back again and you hold your khandha. Can you understand my question?
You mean putting the raft down happens momentarily and then you go back to using the raft again?
Yeah, because not say that the another explanation that you fully enlightened become arahant, you really put down the raft.
Well, this is say in the course of practice.
During the course.
If you don't see the harm or the danger in attachment, then you won't let go yet. Your mind won't yet let go. It's not ready to let go. It's only when the mind really sees the harm, the danger and the disadvantage that comes from attachment that it'll be ready to let go. Or you could say if somebody practicing that, they know something's poisonous and harmful to them, then they'll give it up, they'll abandon it straight away. But if they don't know completely yet, they're not fully aware of how poisonous something is, then they won't completely let go. So this is why we have this, what we call vata samsara, or endless round of birth and death, or cycle of birth and death. It's because people, they can't completely let go yet, so they keep getting reborn.
So it's a complete let go. It's not saying you let go and then, because you still got the feelings on, so sometimes you get caught in the game and then you pick up again. That's my question.
if you want to talk about the practice in the long term in that way, about temporarily letting go of attachment and then returning to, say, struggle, practice more with the kilesas that come back up, you could. Probably the best way to describe it is what we say in the Bodhisattva path, where the practitioner, the Bodhisattva, who's got a ultimate goal of enlightenment, but over a long period they're developing their practice and what we say accumulating parami, accumulating the particular spiritual qualities needed for enlightenment, which will be gathering together, sometimes coming together very strongly, sometimes there's difficulty in, but nevertheless the ultimate goal of enlightenment hasn't been realized yet. Or another, say on a more worldly level, you could compare this to somebody crossing a sea, an ocean or a desert, where there's a lot of difficulty, time and difficulty needed to cross that desert, that sea, so they need a lot of rations and the correct kind of rations to get across the sea. You need food and water. Say if you're going on a desert journey, say you wanted to travel overland to Perth, you would need plenty of food and water and fuel for that journey. And you'd have to study the route map, you'd have to know the route to take so you didn't get lost as well. If you prepared all that correctly, you got the right amount of rations and provisions for the journey, and you studied the route map well, then eventually you'll get to Perth over the desert. Spiritual practice can be like this, you can talk about it this way.